Every year on the 17th of October, an old woman came to the west gate of Aldenmere and stood at the iron rail for exactly 11 minutes. She never spoke to anyone, never waved, never so much as glanced at the small crowd that gathered each morning to watch the changing of the guard. She watched the drill, and then she left, and for 11 years I told myself that next year I would find some way, some excuse, some moment off the rigid clock of the ceremony, to learn who she was waiting for. This year she came in a wheelchair with a nurse at her shoulder, and I understood the moment I saw her face that there would be no next year at all. I had been watching her, in a manner of speaking, for as long as I had stood the west gate, 6 years, the last 3 of them on this exact post, close enough to the rail that on quiet mornings I could hear the click of her cane against the cobblestones before I saw her. In the early years she had come alone, in a long gray coat, and stood very straight, the way people stand when they have spent a lifetime being told to. She always arrived a little before 11 and left a little after, as if the 11 minutes themselves were the appointment and not the ceremony inside them. Then, 3 years ago, the cane appeared. Last year, the nurse. This year, the chair. I had watched a woman grow old at 11-minute intervals, one October at a time, and never learned a single thing about her except that whatever she came for, the gate never gave it to her. The west gate was the quiet one. No tour buses idled along the lane, no flag wavers pressed against the railings hopping for a photograph. Just the regulars, a baker's boy with his tray balanced on one shoulder, a woman walking a small dog that strained at its lead every morning at the same lamppost, and once a year her. At 11 o'clock the relief party came up the forecourt in step, boots striking the stone in the old 4/4 time, and the watching crowd, perhaps 20 people that morning, drew the same small breath crowds always draw, the one that says, "Maybe today something will happen to the man who never moves." She was already at the rail when I first noticed her properly that morning, the nurse beside her with one hand resting, not pushing, on the back of the chair. In her lap the old woman held something I had not seen in previous years, a small flat tin, the kind that once held travel biscuits, its lid gone soft and dull at the corners with age. Her hands, folded over it, trembled slightly, though the morning was mild. I had never seen that tin before. But I had heard it described once, 12 years ago, in a voice I had not thought about since. 12 years ago, in my second month of training, Sergeant Osric Vane kept me back after drill, the way he sometimes did with recruits he hadn't yet made up his mind about. Vane did not waste words, on parade or off it, which is why I remember every one of the ones he spent on me that evening. He told me there was a custom in the regiment, not written anywhere, not taught in any manual, passed from one guardsman to the next the way a man passes down a watch, quietly, and only to someone he judged would keep it. He said that one day, if I was lucky, or unlucky depending how a man looked at it, I would be standing this post when someone came looking for it. Then, because I clearly had no idea what he meant, he told me about a guardsman named Thomas Wren. Wren had stood the west gate, Vane said, in the spring before a war, the same gate, the same 11 o'clock changeover, 60 years before I ever marched it myself. He had a sweetheart named Constance, a baker's daughter from down the lane, who came to see him off the morning his company marched out for the coast. A guardsman on duty cannot speak, cannot break the line of his eyes, cannot so much as nod at the woman he loves while the colors are on the gate, and Wren knew it, and so did she. And there was nothing either of them could do about it except stand on opposite sides of an iron rail, with everything they wanted to say going unsaid. Except Vane told me there was a way around the rule if a man knew it. 3 taps of the rifle butt against the stone, evenly spaced. Then the right hand, palm flat, pressed once over the heart and held there for the span of 3 slow breaths. Nothing in any drill manual called for it. Nothing in any drill manual forbade it either, not in so many words, and that gap, Vane said, with the closest thing to a smile I ever saw on him, was where the custom lived. It meant, in the old wordless language of men who could say nothing else, "I see you. I am still here. Wait for me." Wren gave it to Constance that last morning at the rail before he marched out of the west gate for the last time. He did not come home to give it again. But the regiment remembered. Someone, Vane never said who, and I never asked, had stood the gate the following October and given Constance the signal anyway, in Wren's place, because a promise made at that rail did not stop being a promise just because the man who made it was gone. And the year after that, someone had done it again. Vane told me the custom had quietly continued, passed man to man, sergeant to recruit, for longer than anyone now serving could properly account for, though, he admitted, fewer and fewer of the old guardsmen now knew it, and there might come a year when no one did. Vane died that winter of nothing dramatic, his heart in his sleep, the way old soldiers are supposed to go and rarely do. I filed the story away the way a young man files away everything an old sergeant tells him after dark. Half true, half ghost story, certainly not something to be acted on. 12 years is a long time. I had not thought about Thomas Wren, or Constance, or the tin in all of it. Not until I saw the date on the calendar that morning, the 17th of October, and then looked up and saw the tin in an old woman's lap, and felt every piece of it arrive at once, 12 years too late to do anything gracefully about it. The relief party reached the gate. Beside the incoming sentry stood the duty officer that morning, Captain Aldous Ferris, a precise, unsmiling man who had twice in my hearing written guardsmen up for adjusting a glove strap mid-ceremony. He stood at the edge of the forecourt with his hands behind his back, watching the changeover the way he watched everything, for faults. The drill was 11 movements, performed at 11-second intervals, and I had carried it out perhaps 4,000 times without one of those movements ever belonging to me. The new sentry stepped forward to take my place at the gate. I had 11 seconds, the same 11 minutes she had given this rail, 11 Octobers in a row, folded down now into 11 seconds, to decide whether the next 4 of them were going to be mine, or the regiment's. If I broke step now, in front of Ferris, in front of 20 strangers with their phones half raised, it would be seen and reported, and the report would not have a line on the form for an old sergeant's bedtime story, or a tin box, or a promise 60 years old. I thought about that for perhaps 2 of my 11 seconds. Then I thought about the 11 years she had stood at this rail, and the 6 I had stood on the other side of it, close enough to hear her cane on the stones and never once looking past my own eyes front. And I thought about the chair, and the nurse, and the fact that whatever Vane's someone had been doing for 60 years, there might not be a someone left after today who still knew how. So at the 8th movement of the drill, the half-turn rifle brought to the shoulder, I did not turn. I brought the butt of my rifle down against the stone once, twice, 3 times, evenly spaced, the sound of it sharp and strange in the quiet forecourt. Then I raised my right hand, palm flat, and pressed it once over my heart, and held it there looking straight across the rail at her, for the length of 3 slow breaths. For a moment the whole forecourt seemed to hold its breath with me. Then the old woman's hand came up from the tin in her lap slowly, the way everything about her moved now, and she pressed it flat against her own chest, mirroring the gesture exactly, as if she had practiced it every morning for 60 years against the day it might finally be returned to her. Her eyes never left mine. I do not think she breathed for those 3 breaths either. When I lowered my hand and stepped back into the drill, 9th movement, 10th, 11th, finished a half-second late. A fault no one but Ferris would ever log. She was smiling, and the nurse beside her had gone very still, watching the old woman instead of me. The little crowd had felt something happen without being able to say what. A few of them clapped, uncertainly, the way people do when they sense a moment has passed and don't want to be the one who missed it entirely. Captain Ferris did not clap. He had watched every second of it, the broken movement, the 4 stolen beats, the half-second I had cost the regiment its precision, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, his eyes moving from me to the old woman, to the tin still held in her lap. Something crossed his face that I had never once seen there in 3 years. Then he turned back to the ceremony as though nothing had happened, which was, I would come to understand, exactly the right thing for him to do. The nurse wheeled her away from the rail a few minutes later, once the new guard had settled and the small crowd had drifted on toward the lane. As they passed the gate, the old woman lifted the tin from her lap and held it out, not to me. I was on post. I could not have taken it if I'd wanted to, but to Ferris, who stepped forward and took it from her without a word, without looking inside. She said only one thing, in a voice almost too thin to carry past the rail. He said someone would still remember. Then the nurse turned the chair toward the lane, and they were gone, and the forecourt settled back into its 11 o'clock quiet as though none of it had happened at all. Ferris opened the tin that evening, in his office, with me standing at attention in front of his desk, certain I was about to be written up after all for the one thing I had never done. Inside, on a bed of yellowed cotton wool, was a single photograph. A young guardsman at this same gate, 60 years younger than the stone around him, looking directly at the camera the way men did before they learned to look away from it. Beneath the photograph was a folded letter, and beneath that, worn nearly smooth, a regimental badge that had clearly spent 60 years inside someone's coat pocket, rubbed by a thumb. Ferris read the letter once in silence, set it back in the tin, and closed the lid. Then he told me to return to my post in the morning as usual. Nothing more. I never read the letter, and I never asked to. I did not need to. I already understood the only part of it that could possibly matter, that a promise made at an iron rail, by a man who never came home to keep it, had been carried for 60 years by a regiment that had no obligation to carry it at all, and that it had taken one more guardsman, on one more ordinary morning, to finish what Thomas Wren had started and could not finish himself. I went back to the west gate the next morning, and the morning after that, and stood the drill the way I always had, 11 movements, 11 seconds apart, every one of them mine again. But I have never since believed that a clean drill was the most important thing a guardsman could give to the people on the other side of the rail. Some debts are 60 years old. Someone still has to be standing there to pay them. The following October, on the second of my 2 months training a new recruit, I kept him back after drill, the way Vane had once kept me. He had no idea what I meant, of course, they never do at first. I told him there was a custom in the regiment, not written anywhere, passed quietly, man to man, only to someone judged likely to keep it. I told him about a guardsman named Thomas Wren, and a rail, and 3 taps of a rifle butt against the stone, and a hand pressed flat over the heart for the span of 3 slow breaths. I did not tell him about the woman in the chair, or the tin, or the letter I never read. Some things a man keeps for himself. But I told him the rest of it, the way it had been told to me, and watched him carry it out the gate that evening the way a man carries something he has only just understood is heavier than it looked.